I'm being joined by former Labor Senator and Sky News contributor, Stephen Conroy. Now, Stephen's in the lockdown state. Thanks for taking the time out of your Sunday for joining me, Stephen.
Good to be with you, Cory.
Now, as a Victorian, I'm asking you to take your political hat off for a moment. You can't be entirely happy with what's going on in Victoria right now, can you?
Well, I think the escape out of the quarantine has put all Victorians into a very difficult situation, and it has been a tough 6 weeks. Today was meant to be the lifting of the stage 4. We've effectively got another 6 weeks to go before we get towards the October 26th rolling average of 5 or less, which even the creators of the model are on the front pages of the papers today saying, oh, look, I wouldn't have quite interpreted it and made the decisions the Andrews government's made around when we can move out of effectively stage 4 in the end of October. So no, I think Victorians have been very frustrated. I think by and large, Victorians have behaved fantastically. You just got to look at the public polling for the Andrews government, not the Liberal Party research that was so embarrassing that it explains why they predicted they were going to win government at the last state election only to lose in a landslide. I mean, the sort of polling expertise that went into the stuff on the front page of the Herald Sun deserves to be put in the bin where it belongs. But the polling suggests that over 60% of Victorians continue to support the restrictions. Because what they want to see, whether they agree or disagree, and they will get to the point where they get an opportunity at the next election to apportion blame, but they want this solved. What they find pretty pathetic is the sort of arguments being made by Tim and Michael O'Brien from the opposition. They really aren't getting traction in the broader community. They're talking to themselves, trying to stir up the sort of protests you've seen in the last few days in Victoria. And I was very pleased, though, to congratulate Tim to say he did not support today's, idiots, because they are putting Victorians at risk. And more importantly, they are potentially prolonging all Victorians' time in the lockdown. So I was very pleased to see Tim draw that line.
Yeah, Stephen, can you understand the frustration, though, for a lot of people where, you know, the excuses for the Black Lives Matter march were made?
No, absolutely. This was a serious misstep, Cory. No, that's a very fair point that was made by both you and by Tim. It was a serious misstep for the government to look soft on it. They've got their act together eventually, but they let the genie out of the bottle. They should have said no from day one. Okay. And it was a mistake.
You've characterised it as a misstep or a mistake. Is this the only area where the government has erred or overreacted in response to COVID?
No, look, the failure of the quarantine, subject of inquiry at the moment, but it's very clear what's gone wrong. Almost all of the outbreak, whether you're in Queensland or you're in New South Wales or here in Victoria, can be traced back to 2 or 3 individuals doing the wrong thing in their responsibilities that they were hired to do around hotel quarantine. And that was unforgivable. The pain to small business, the pain to families, the pain and difficulties for parents trying to cope with homeschooling, the kids themselves. I mean, this has been a very tough 6 weeks for school kids.
And that's actually a really important point, Stephen, because, you know, we hear about all the public stuff and the protests and people getting angry, and we hear about the deaths, of course, the tragic deaths of those affected by COVID. But the errors in process, and I would argue the belligerence, I think, by the government in the face of some advice, has had an enormous human cost, a human price for kids who can't go to school, parents who are stuck at home with their children. I know how important it is to get a break. Businesses that are going broke at a rate of knots, and really there doesn't seem to be that much hope on the horizon. I just wonder whether things will ever return to normal in Victoria.
Well, firstly, there's certainly hope for regional Victoria. I mean, there was very positive results on the COVID cases again today. I suspect by Wednesday they'll be on the path, come out of the lockdown in a very sensible approach. So I think regional Victoria is going to have some good news in the next few days. Metropolitan Melbourne, it's going to be tough. Getting the total down to under 5, a 14-day rolling average is going to be challenging. And the problem with models is you have to make assumptions, you have to plug in assumptions, and you got one rule at the end of the day. I think the creators of the model have pointed to a couple of areas where a lot more hope could be given to Victorians if the Premier, and he'll have a perfect excuse, he keeps talking about putting real data into these models rather than projections. So he's going to have an opportunity, I would hope, over the next few weeks to be able to take into account some of the criticisms from the creators of the model, where he'll be able to give a much greater degree of hope to Melburnians who will still be in pretty much effectively a stage 4 lockdown.
Okay, jumping forward, Stephen, we've resolved the COVID crisis, but then the public start to look at the cost of this, and they assess it in the context of the long list of scandals that has been attached to this government. I ran through some of them before, you may know: travel rorts, bullying, electoral rorts, red shirts, branch stacking, so on. Is there failure on COVID-19? And it's unquestionably there have been failures with it. Going to be the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back and sees the Andrews government beaten at the election?
Look, it's over 2 years to go. I don't think that the COVID difficulties, the quarantine, I think there'll be some people who will mark the government and the Premier down permanently. But I think what they'll really care about in 2 years' time is how the state pulled through economically. Have we got unemployment down from the 11% the Treasurer was forecasting by December? Have we got the growth going? Can we see that there's an economic path forward? So I think it's way too early. As I said, there was some quite comical polling released in the Herald sign. I mean, genuinely, Cory, the people who did that polling predicted victory at the last state election. So they really shouldn't be entitled to a napkin.
I've got a wrap, but I've got one question for you. Will Daniel Andrew survive as Premier post-COVID?
Look, Daniel Andrews will be Premier for as long as Daniel Andrews wants to be Premier.
Right, that's it. Stephen Conroy, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to talk to you,
Coming up
Cory.
after the break. Thank you.